Okay, so here's the heart. Okay, so the heart again is found just left of center. What is the cavity that the heart is found in? He was talking about it in the first video. Do you guys remember? It's called the mediastinum. So it's found within the mediastinum. Right? It is pointing diagonally. So we've got two. So we've got the base. Okay. So the base is superior and the apex is inferior. It's orientated just so that the apex is pointing towards the left hip, and then the base is pointing slightly towards the right shoulder. Okay, so it's not like this; it's kind of like that. Okay, you've got the four chambers. Okay, so we've got two atria and two ventricles. Over the atria are called auricles. A-U-R-I-C-L-E-S. Right, so to early anatomists, it kind of looked like ears. Right, so because it kind of looked like ears, they're called auricles. If you open it up here, on the inside of the auricles, you have muscle in here called the pectinate muscle. The function of the pectinate muscle is it's highly elastic. So when blood comes in, these can stretch, and then as they recoil, it pushes the blood down out of the atria. Okay, so I'm going to start the journey in the right atria, and then we'll kind of go through the body. Okay, so blood will return to the heart via two veins. The SVC called the superior vena cava, and the IVC known as the inferior vena cava. Okay, every ounce of blood in your body is going to return to the heart via one of these two veins. So every blood vessel north of the heart will drain into the SVC. Every blood vessel inferior to the heart will drain into the IVC. The pressure in the SVC and the IVC is going to be high or low, guys? Low. Why is it going to be low?
Because it's technically the furthest away from the heart.
Well, it's close to the heart, but right? Why does the pressure have to be the lowest in the body at the IVC and the SVC? What do things do? Do they go from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure? So to ensure, right, it's like a drain, right? The drain has to be the lowest point in the tub, right? So the pressure has to be the lowest in the IVC and the SVC to ensure, right, entice the blood to flow to it, right? Because blood wants to spontaneously flow from areas of high or low. So once it comes in, it's going to go into the right atria. From the right atria, it's going to go through the tricuspid valve, okay? The tricuspid valve has got these things here called chordae tendineae. Okay, these are quite literally the heartstrings, right? So you talk about like poets and songwriters talk about tugging at the heartstrings. These are quite literally the heartstrings, and these things right here, right, are they're yes.
Pencil, so you can see it better.
Pencil, yes.
Thanks.
Right here. So right here, these are the chordae tendineae. These things right here, right? And then these are attached to the papillae that are right here, okay? So you're going to go from the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Now you may notice that the right ventricle is significantly smaller than the left ventricle. Why is the right ventricle significantly smaller? The left ventricle is by far the largest of the four chambers. Why is the right ventricle not that big?
Does it have to pressurize to push the blood out?
It doesn't have to go everywhere. So this is what's called the pulmonary circuit, okay? So blood comes here, goes here, and then it's going to go up this thing right here. So this is called the pulmonary semilunar valve. So these look like half moons, okay? So from the pulmonary semilunar valve, it's going to go through the pulmonary trunk, also known as the pulmonary artery. So we're talking about this, right? This is an artery because by definition it's taking blood away from the heart, right? But it's deoxygenated. So it's going to go from the pulmonary trunk to here, to the pulmonary arteries. From the pulmonary arteries, it's going to go to the lungs, where it gets oxygenated, and then it's going to return via the pulmonary vein. So this is an example of a deoxygenated artery and an oxygenated vein, okay? So it's going to return via the pulmonary veins to the left atria. From the left atria, it's going to go through the bicuspid, also more commonly known as the mitral valve. Anybody know why it's called the mitral valve? So it's called the mitral valve because it reminded early anatomists of the mitre hat. You guys ever seen the Pope with that big pointy hat he wears? So the big pointy hat the Pope wears is called the mitre hat. So it's called the mitral valve because early anatomists, it reminded me of the hat that the Pope wears. So it's called the bicuspid or mitral valve. Both are commonly utilized even today in cardiology, right? So, right, you might talk, your grandma might be talking about, oh, I got to get my mitral valve, or I've got a heart murmur because I've got mitral valve prolapse, right? So that's a very common thing that happens in older people, okay? So I'll go from the left atria into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it's going to go through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, right? So right here. So this thing right here.
Can't see above your hand. Thanks.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Better. Okay. So this is the aortic semilunar valve to the aorta. This is going to be by far the highest pressure in the body, right? So the pressure here in the IVC and SVC is nearly 0 millimeters mercury. This might be 250 millimeters of mercury. It's very, very high, okay? From there, it's going to immediately branch into 3 branches, okay? So this is called the right brachiocephalic, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian, okay? And then it's going to go into the aortic arch, and then the descending aorta, and then the thoracic aorta, and then the abdominal aorta. And then from there, it's going to branch off into a bunch of different blood vessels, which we'll get into in much greater detail next week, okay? So back to the question here, okay? So right ventricle, pretty small, left ventricle, very big. So this is the pulmonary circuit. You may hang talking about it. This is the systemic circuit. So why is the left ventricle far and away the largest of the 4 chambers? Where is the right ventricle pumping blood? Just to the lungs, right next door. Where is the left ventricle pumping blood to?
Whole body.
Systemically, the entire body. So it makes sense that there would be very, very thick walls here. And this is called the interventricular septum. Okay? So this is what divides the 2 chambers there. Okay? Now, I've described the blood as going from right atria to right ventricle, through the semilunar valve to the lungs, back to the left atria, through the bicuspid valve, through the left ventricle, through the aortic semilunar, and out. But that's not how the circuit actually works, right? So we talked about the lub-dub sound, right? So you listen, and we're going to do this next week where you guys are actually going to do blood pressure and all that kind of stuff like that. So the lub sound, okay? So the lub sound is blood simultaneously rushes in to the left and right atria. The left and right atria contract simultaneously and push blood through the tricuspid and bicuspid valves simultaneously. When the valves close, that's the lub sound that you hear. So blood rushes, so the valves open, blood rushes in, the 2 valves close. That's the lub sound. Then the ventricles contract, pushing blood simultaneously through the pulmonary and aortic semilunar valve. And then when those close, that is the dub sound that you hear. So it's not a 4-stroke cycle, it's a 2-stroke cycle, right? So lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub. Okay, so that's what you're hearing when you actually hear those sounds. So we talked about like a heart murmur, right? So you go into the doctor detects a heart murmur. Most common heart murmur is a mitral valve heart murmur, right? So we more often have mitral valve issues than we are tricuspid valve issues because there's one less valve there. Why we only evolved one less valve on the left side is still one of those things we're trying to figure out why that evolved the way it is, right? So like listen to a heart and you hear like gurgling sound. What's happening is this valve isn't closing properly, and so when the ventricles contract, some of the blood is going back up into the atria, causing a heart inefficiency. Now, unless you've got a really, really bad, like a mitral valve prolapse, or like it's really not working at all, heart murmur is not really a very serious thing, right? So there's even been elite athletes with a heart murmur, and compete just fine with it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about a couple other things, and then we will wrap it up. Okay. We got all of this blood flowing through the chambers, okay? Is any of this blood actually feeding the heart tissue? Your heart needs blood just like any other type of tissue in the body. No. So you have right off of so as it's coming out of the left ventricle, we've got these blood vessels here, right here. So we've got the coronary arteries and then the cardiac veins. What does the term coronary mean, guys? Anybody's taking a stab at this? Who here speaks Spanish?
Isn't it crown?
How do you say crown in Spanish? Corona, right? So the coronary corona, right? So to early anatomists, it reminded them of the crown of thorns placed on Jesus' head at his crucifixion, right? So, right, the Romans wanted to mock him for claiming to be the king of the Jews, so they put a crown of thorns on his head. So that's why it's called the coronary artery. So we associate coronary with heart because of the coronary arteries, but they're called the coronary arteries because the early anatomists remind them of a crown of thorns. Okay, so we got the coronary arteries which supply blood to the individual heart tissue, and then when the blood leaves, it leaves via these cardiac veins, right? So that will then go back into, sucker, does that want to come off here? Right here. So this is called the coronary sinus, right here. Right. This here is called the oval window. It's also another oval window, okay? When you're inside of mom, do your lungs work? No, you're literally in a fluid-filled sac. You ever seen those like video footage, like they take the baby out still inside the amniotic sac and then they pop the sac? Okay. So when you're inside of mom, you're not breathing, right? So you don't really need the right side of your heart. So blood coming in via that umbilical cord, right? So the umbilical artery is taking deoxygenated blood from the belly to mom. Mom breathes, right? Oxygenates the blood and then sends it back via the pulmonary vein. Okay, so once it comes in through the pulmonary vein, it'll go through these blood vessels, but instead of you utilizing the right side of your heart, it just simply bypasses through this thing actually is a hole, and it will actually bypass and go straight to the left atria, and then you'll complete the circuit. Now, second you're born, what happens? You cry. The second you cry, there's a little flap here that closes, and then you immediately utilize your lungs, and you immediately start using the pulmonary circuit, right? Has anybody here heard of a condition called the tetralogy of Fallot? Right, so it is a rare cardiac issue involving like a congenital defect. What's a congenital defect, guys?
You're born with it?
You're born with it, right? So it's a congenital defect of the heart. So tetralogy means what, guys? Right, so a trilogy would be 3, a tetralogy would be 4, right? Like, sometimes they should have just stopped with the third movie they did, right? So it's 4 different things wrong with the heart. One of them is this valve doesn't close properly, and then you end up having deoxygenated blood going over to the left atrium. Okay. One more thing, and then I will wrap this up for the day. Okay. This right here is known as the LAD, left anterior descending. Okay, because it's on the left side of the heart, it's in the front, and it's going down. This is the artery which supplies blood to the left ventricle, which is far and away the most important chamber in the heart, right? So if that becomes damaged, your cardiac output goes down significantly, okay? So what is the leading cause of death in the United States, guys? Not car accidents. Used to be, actually.
Heart failure, right?
Heart disease, right? Heart failure, right? So when we say heart disease, what do we actually mean? Coronary artery disease, right? So clogging of these coronary arteries, either causing heart attacks or diminished heart capacity, okay? This one in cardiology is called the widowmaker. Anybody heard that term before? Okay. If you have a blockage, a complete blockage of the LAD, and it causes cardiac, so what is a heart attack, guys? A heart attack is called an MI. What does an MI stand for?
Myocardial infarction.
What's a myocardial infarction? First off, what's an infarction?
Pretty sure it's just heart tissue that's dying.
So myocardial will specifically be heart tissue. So an infarction is death and damage of tissue due to lack of blood supply, okay? So this becomes completely occluded, right, meaning blocked, right, and then you have a myocardial infarction. Because there's no blood, the heart tissue dies, right? So enough tissue dies in your right ventricle or your left ventricle, you can either die from it or have such severely limited cardiac output that doing anything like as strenuous as walking up a couple of stairs to get up to the classroom becomes incredibly difficult to do, right? What is the what's the first warning sign for most people that they have coronary artery disease? a heart attack. So there's a lot of people that don't even realize they have coronary artery disease until they have a heart attack. And about 50% of heart attacks, 50% of people who have their first heart attack, it's fatal. So there's a lot of people this year who don't realize they have anything wrong with their heart until they have a massive heart attack and die. Right, so it happens a lot. So once you get about my age, right, you should go in and get a stress test done and get an EKG done and double check and make sure that everything's going well in there. Questions on this stuff, guys? No? All right. Have yourselves a good weekend. Watch the Diamondbacks tomorrow.